any new light on the crash itself. We did hear from one photographer just then who said that it was not the paparazzi who caused the crash, rather it was negligent driving. And so far, that's what this episode has concluded. However, many people struggle to accept that.
In a moment that shook the monarchy to its core, Kate Middleton was left in tears after a DNA test confirmed Diana's darkest secret. The truth, long buried by the royal family, was finally exposed, and it was far more devastating than anyone could have imagined. As the weight of this revelation crushed the family's carefully constructed facade, Kate was forced to confront not just the legacy of her mother-in-law, but the very future of the monarchy itself. This is the story of betrayal, heartbreak, and the explosive truth that changed everything.
Ultimately, we are working to build a happier, healthier world. We want to shape fairer, safer, kinder, more equal societies. Societies that seek the common good and a better future together. For just as we need to restore, protect and invest in our planet, so we must also restore, protect and invest in our communities, relationships and people living on it.
It all began with a routine medical test, a standard procedure within the royal family. These tests were part of the ongoing health checks for members of the family. In most cases, they were just a formality, nothing more than a regular part of maintaining good health. But for Kate, this particular test would turn out to be anything but ordinary. Though she initially thought it would be another simple checkup, there was an unsettling feeling that lingered as she waited for the results. At first, Kate didn't anticipate anything out of the ordinary. The royal family had a long-standing tradition of ensuring that its members remained in peak health, and routine medical procedures were an expected part of that. Still, as the time passed and she awaited the results, a sense of apprehension began to set in. The anticipation only grew when she was informed that there had been some unusual findings from the test. This was not a part of the usual procedure, and immediately, Kate felt that the situation was more serious than she had anticipated. When the royal doctors handed her the sealed envelope containing the results, Kate's heart skipped a beat. She was no stranger to being in the public eye, but the weight of this envelope, the sealed message inside, and the sense that it contained something more than just a medical report filled her with unease. As she opened it, her hands trembled slightly, as if already knowing that the contents of the envelope would shake her to the core. Inside was a report confirming something that had been long suspected, but never officially confirmed. The results pointed to the presence of a genetic trait, a piece of history that Kate had never before encountered. It was as if the test had pulled back the curtain on a well-guarded royal secret. The genetic information found within the test wasn't just of personal importance. It was a clue to a much larger, darker story that had been buried for decades. As Kate began to process the details, she realized that what she was reading wasn't just a piece of medical information. It was a revelation that had the potential to change everything she knew about her family and the royal institution. The test results confirmed a hidden truth about Princess Diana, a secret that had been kept from the public eye for years. Diana had known about this truth, but had kept it to herself, not wanting it to disrupt her children's lives or the monarchy's carefully curated image. Kate, however, now held the key to that truth, and she couldn't ignore what she had learned. Kate was aware of the pressures and expectations that came with being a member of the royal family, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotional storm that followed the discovery. Diana's life, already full of scrutiny and heartache, had been shaped by the very institution that Kate had married into. What the test revealed wasn't just a family secret. It was a key part of the royal family's hidden history, one that had been buried for years to protect the monarchy's image. For Kate, the revelation was overwhelming. In many ways, it felt like a personal betrayal. She had admired Diana for her courage and strength, but now she was faced with the harsh reality that her mother-in-law had endured far more than anyone could have imagined. Diana's pain had been silenced, her voice muted, all in the name of preserving the image of the royal family. The secrecy that had surrounded Diana's life had been more than just a matter of personal privacy. It was a deliberate effort to control her narrative, and in turn, control the monarchy's public image. As Kate began to digest the information, she found herself questioning everything she had known about the royal family and her place within it. The realization that the monarchy had played a role in silencing Diana and concealing her truth left Kate feeling conflicted and uncertain. She understood that her marriage to William had brought her into this world, but she never could have anticipated the emotional toll that would come with the discoveries she was now faced with. The weight of the royal family's secrets was heavy, and it was not a burden she could bear alone. The tension in the room was palpable as Kate absorbed the gravity of the situation. She knew that these revelations were not just personal. They were political, historical, and deeply embedded within the royal family's complicated legacy. Her role as the future queen consort had just become far more complex, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of that responsibility bearing down on her. In the days that followed, Kate found herself consumed by the question of how to handle what she had discovered. She could not simply ignore the truth. It was too significant, too powerful to be dismissed. But the thought of confronting the royal family with this knowledge was daunting. What would this mean for her relationship with William? And how would the public react if this secret were exposed? The future of the monarchy seemed uncertain, and Kate's role within it was now in question. Though Kate had always been a loyal and dedicated member of the royal family, her loyalty was now being tested in ways she never imagined. She was caught between her love for her husband, her respect for Diana, and her duty to the institution that she had vowed to serve. The discovery had shaken her to the core, and she found herself struggling with a profound sense of betrayal. The trust she had placed in the royal family had been shattered, and she now had to decide whether to uphold the monarchy's carefully crafted image or to expose the truth, no matter the cost. This moment marked a pivotal turning point in Kate's life. What had seemed like a routine medical test had opened a door to a dark and painful secret, one that once uncovered could never be closed again. Kate was now faced with a choice: to stay silent, continuing to protect the royal family's legacy, or to speak out, revealing the truth that had been hidden for so long. This was no longer just a personal decision. It was one that would affect the future of the monarchy and her place within it. As she sat alone with the documents, Kate couldn't help but reflect on the implications of the test results. Diana's story, once a tragic tale of secrecy and betrayal, now felt even more poignant. The woman who had been silenced, controlled, and manipulated by the very institution she had married into had left behind a legacy that would not be easily forgotten. And now, that legacy was in Kate's hands. The weight of it all felt heavy on her shoulders, and the uncertainty of what came next left her feeling more alone than ever before. The revelation had rocked Kate to her core, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She could feel the eyes of the world upon her, and the pressure to make the right decision weighed heavily on her mind. For Kate, the truth had come crashing into her life, and now she had to decide how to move forward in a world that would never look at her or her family the same way again. The days following Kate Middleton's discovery were filled with a storm of emotions, each one more overwhelming than the last. What had started as an ordinary day quickly spiraled into something far more complex and troubling. The test results had not only confirmed a hidden truth about Princess Diana's life, but had also revealed the deep layers of secrecy that had been woven into the very fabric of the royal family. As Kate sat with this newfound knowledge, she couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. What was she supposed to do with this information? How could she reconcile her position within the royal family with the truth she had just uncovered? At first, Kate tried to compartmentalize the information, telling herself that the royal family would handle it in the way they always had. After all, they had a long history of dealing with scandals and secrets, and they had always managed to protect their image. But this felt different. This wasn't just another royal scandal. It was a betrayal at the very core of the family, and it had come at a great personal cost to Diana. What had been hidden for so long now lay exposed, and Kate realized that she couldn't simply ignore it. This was a matter of human dignity, not just royal protocol. As Kate wrestled with her emotions, she found herself turning to William for support. She knew that he, too, had his own struggles with the legacy of his mother's life and death. But now, the truth was laid bare in front of them. There was no going back. The DNA test results weren't just a confirmation of what they had suspected. They were a key to understanding a painful chapter of their family history, one that had been deliberately obscured. For William, this discovery was just as shocking as it was painful. He had always known that Diana had faced immense challenges, but to see those challenges documented so coldly and clinically in a medical report was an entirely different experience. The two of them sat together in silence, each grappling with the enormity of the situation. William, ever the protector, was devastated by the implications of what had been revealed. His mother, the woman who had been a symbol of strength and resilience, had been silenced by the very institution she had married into. Diana's suffering had been turned into a matter of royal politics, her pain manipulated to protect the monarchy's image. As he looked at Kate, he could see the pain mirrored in her eyes. This was not just about Diana. It was about the royal family's entire history of secrets and manipulation. And now, Kate was caught in the middle of it all. Kate's thoughts turned to Diana's legacy and the impact that the royal family's actions had on her life. Diana had been a woman who had endured immense personal turmoil, yet she had always remained a figure of grace in the public eye. Her struggle had been hidden behind the palace walls, but now, in the light of this new revelation, it became clear just how much she had been forced to sacrifice. The secrecy that surrounded her, the manipulation of her story, and the isolation she endured, all of it came rushing back in a wave of realization. Diana had been a woman who had fought for her voice to be heard, yet the royal family had systematically worked to keep it quiet. And now, years after her death, the truth was finally coming to light. Kate found herself torn between her duty to the royal family and her growing sense of outrage over the injustice Diana had faced. She knew that her role as the future queen consort required her to maintain loyalty to the institution. But how could she continue to do so when the very foundation of that institution was built on lies? The monarchy had long been regarded as a symbol of stability, but at this moment, it felt more like a prison, a place where truth was hidden and reality was manipulated to maintain control. Kate's allegiance to the family she had married into was being tested in ways she never imagined. She had always believed in the monarchy's ability to adapt, to learn from its past mistakes. But now she was confronted with the uncomfortable truth that the system itself was built to protect its own power at the expense of the truth. The more Kate reflected on the events surrounding Diana's life, the more she realized the extent to which the royal family had failed her. Diana had been subjected to intense scrutiny by the press, but what was even more damaging was the way the palace had handled her suffering. Instead of offering support, the institution had treated her as a problem to be managed. Her struggles, her pain, and her very humanity reduced to a series of public relations challenges. The idea that Diana's pain had been minimized for the sake of protecting the monarchy's image was more than Kate could bear. How could she continue to support an institution that had treated Diana, her mother-in-law, in such a callous manner? Kate knew that the decision she now faced was not an easy one. The royal family had always been a symbol of tradition, and for her to speak out against them would be a monumental break from the past. Yet, as she looked at William, she saw the same conflicted emotions reflected in his eyes. They both understood that the truth, once uncovered, could not be hidden again. The documents, the test results, the internal memos, all of it pointed to a deliberate effort to control the narrative surrounding Diana's life. And now, with this knowledge, Kate was left to navigate the murky waters of loyalty, duty, and truth. In the days that followed, Kate found herself deep in thought, weighing her options. She knew that if the truth were exposed, it could cause a public outcry of unprecedented proportions. The monarchy, which had always been so carefully protected by its PR team, would be at the mercy of the media. But at the same time, the world deserved to know the truth. Diana had been denied a voice for far too long, and it was time for that to change. Kate was no longer just a royal wife. She was a witness to a deeply painful chapter in history, one that demanded to be acknowledged. As the pressure mounted, Kate began to question her own role within the royal family. Could she continue to support an institution that had been so complicit in Diana's suffering? How could she stand by and remain silent when the truth was begging to be heard? The weight of her position was starting to feel unbearable, and Kate realized that this was no longer just about protecting the monarchy. It was about honoring Diana's memory and ensuring that her voice would no longer be silenced. William, too, found himself in a difficult position. His love for his mother had always been at the forefront of his mind, but now he was being forced to reconcile his own feelings with the reality of his future as king. The monarchy had shaped him into the person he was, but how could he take the throne knowing what had been done to his mother? The royal family had always taught him the importance of duty. But duty to what? To an institution that had betrayed his mother, or to the truth, no matter the consequences? As the days turned into weeks, Kate and William found themselves increasingly isolated. The pressure from the public was mounting, and the walls of secrecy that had once protected the royal family were beginning to crack. The media had already begun to speculate about the nature of Diana's secret, and Kate knew that it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. The question was not whether the monarchy could survive this revelation, but whether Kate and William could continue to live within it. Kate's decision would ultimately come down to a choice between loyalty to her husband and the royal family, and loyalty to the truth. She knew that speaking out would have far-reaching consequences, but she also understood that keeping silent would be a betrayal of everything Diana had endured. The truth, she realized, could no longer be hidden behind closed doors. It was time for the world to know what had really happened to Diana and the role the royal family had played in her suffering. It was time for the royal family to be held accountable for the secrets it had kept for far too long. As Kate Middleton continued to process the shocking revelations that had come to light, she found herself on the precipice of a decision that would shape not only her future, but also the future of the monarchy itself. What had begun as an isolated and deeply personal discovery now had far-reaching implications. The documents detailing Diana's suffering, the hidden test results, and the royal family's calculated silence had opened a Pandora's box. The once carefully curated image of the monarchy was beginning to crack, and Kate knew that there was no turning back. The truth had been uncovered, and the world was waiting to see what would happen next. The burden of this knowledge weighed heavily on Kate. She had always been acutely aware of the scrutiny that came with being a member of the royal family. But now, the stakes felt higher than ever before. With each passing day, the tension grew. The pressure to make a decision, to take a stand, became more intense. She had spent years maintaining a public image of composure and grace, but in the wake of these revelations, that image seemed almost irrelevant. What mattered now was the truth, and the truth could no longer be ignored or hidden away. Kate's role in the royal family had always been one of support. She had been expected to uphold the values and traditions of the monarchy, to stand by her husband William as he navigated the complexities of his position as the future king. But now, with the truth about Diana's life and the family's complicity in her suffering laid bare, Kate found herself questioning the very institution she had sworn to serve. Could she, in good conscience, continue to stand by an institution that had done so much to betray her mother-in-law? Was it possible to reconcile her loyalty to William with the growing sense of outrage she felt over the actions of the royal family? In the weeks that followed, Kate found herself having long conversations with William. The two of them had always been close, but now their bond was tested in ways it had never been before. William, who had always been deeply affected by the loss of his mother, was now confronted with the full scope of the betrayal. The documents confirmed what he had long suspected. that the royal family had known about his mother's pain and had done nothing to help her. The knowledge that his family had played a role in her suffering was a bitter pill to swallow, and it left William struggling with feelings of anger, betrayal, and confusion. Kate, for her part, understood the depth of William's pain. She had seen firsthand how much he had been affected by his mother's death and the years of grief that had followed. But now, with the truth finally revealed, there was no longer any room for ambiguity. Diana's suffering had been manipulated for the sake of the monarchy's image, and Kate knew that this was a wound that would never fully heal. How could they move forward, knowing what they now knew? How could they continue to represent an institution that had so callously disregarded the humanity of one of their own? For William, the answer seemed elusive. He had been raised to believe in the monarchy, to understand its importance in maintaining stability and tradition. But now, with the truth out in the open, the monarchy seemed like a fragile institution, built on a foundation of lies and secrecy. The very system that had once seemed unshakable now felt vulnerable, its power undermined by the truth of Diana's life. William was torn between his duty to the crown and his love for his mother. The two seemed irreconcilable. As Kate navigated these complicated emotions, she found herself increasingly isolated. She knew that her position within the royal family was precarious. She was expected to maintain a certain level of decorum, to support her husband and the monarchy at all costs. But the more she learned about Diana's experiences, the more she realized that the royal family had betrayed not only Diana, but also its own principles. The monarchy had always presented itself as an institution built on honor and duty, but the truth now suggested that it was far more concerned with self-preservation than with the well-being of its members. Kate's internal conflict only deepened as the public began to take notice of the revelations. The media, always eager to pounce on any scandal involving the royal family, quickly turned its attention to the leaked documents and the DNA test results. Headlines blared with sensationalized accounts of the royal family's secrets, and the public's reaction was swift and unforgiving. People were outraged. Protesters took to the streets, demanding accountability from the monarchy. The once unassailable institution now found itself under siege, its carefully cultivated image of respectability shattered in the face of the truth. Kate knew that the monarchy could no longer operate as it had in the past. The public had become far more attuned to the idea that the royal family was not above reproach. The days of unquestioning loyalty to the crown were over, and Kate realized that this was the moment for change. She couldn't remain silent. The truth had to come out, and the royal family had to be held accountable for its actions. But how could she reconcile her desire for justice with her loyalty to William and the monarchy? How could she navigate the treacherous waters of public opinion and familial duty? In her heart, Kate knew that her role in the royal family could no longer be one of passive support. She had to take action, to use her position to bring about change. But the path forward was unclear. Would speaking out risk tearing apart the very institution she had married into? Or would it allow the monarchy to rebuild itself, stronger and more transparent, by confronting the truth head-on? As Kate wrestled with these questions, she found herself drawing strength from her own values. She had always been a woman who valued integrity and honesty, and these were the principles that now guided her. She could not, in good conscience, continue to uphold an institution that had betrayed the very ideals it claimed to represent. The truth had to be told, no matter the consequences. It was a painful realization, but one that was necessary for the future of both her family and the monarchy. Kate knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be backlash, both from within the royal family and from the public. But she also knew that silence was no longer an option. The truth had already been exposed, and it was only a matter of time before it would come to define the monarchy's future. The question was no longer whether the truth would be accepted, but how the royal family would adapt to the world that now knew it. William too understood the gravity of the situation. He knew that his mother's legacy could not be allowed to fade into the background. Her suffering, her strength, and her voice had been silenced for too long, and it was time for that to change. Together, Kate and William began to talk about the next steps. They knew that they couldn't undo the damage that had been done, but they could work to ensure that future generations would not have to face the same betrayals. The monarchy, they both agreed, needed to evolve. It needed to be transparent and accountable, willing to confront its past if it was to have any hope of moving forward. As the weight of the decision pressed down on them, Kate and William found themselves united in their determination. They would not allow their family's history to define them. They would speak out, not only for Diana, but for all those who had been silenced by the monarchy's veil of secrecy. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Kate was resolute. She could no longer stand by and watch as the monarchy clung to its outdated traditions. The truth was out, and it was time for the royal family to face it, no matter the cost. As the shockwaves of the royal revelations continued to ripple through the public and the family itself, the reality of the situation began to set in for Kate Middleton. She had always been an advocate for change within the monarchy, but the discoveries surrounding Diana's suffering and the royal family's role in concealing the truth had pushed her to the edge. It was no longer a matter of just speaking out. It was now about how she, William, and the entire monarchy would rebuild from the ashes of a shattered reputation. Every decision they made now seemed fraught with consequence. They could not undo the past, nor could they pretend that the revelations had not rocked the very foundation of the monarchy. Yet, there was no choice but to move forward, and Kate knew that the steps they took in the coming days would shape the future of the royal family for generations. The pressure was immense, but there was also a sense of clarity that came from knowing what had to be done. The truth could no longer be ignored. They had to confront it, not just for the public, but for the legacy of Diana and the future of the monarchy itself. In the weeks that followed the leaks, Kate found herself in numerous meetings with William and senior advisors. The discussions were tense, filled with a sense of urgency and trepidation. The media frenzy showed no signs of abating, and every new revelation about the royal family's hidden past seemed to ignite another round of outrage. The palace was under siege, and the royals were scrambling to find a way to contain the damage. But there was no denying it. Whatever happened next, the monarchy would never be the same. Kate, however, found herself unable to ignore the personal toll the situation was taking on William. His grief, which had always been there beneath the surface, was now compounded by feelings of betrayal, anger, and confusion. The realization that his own family had been complicit in hiding the truth about his mother's pain was a blow that cut deep. For William, the journey of healing was only just beginning, and it would not be an easy one. As much as Kate wanted to protect him, she knew that the only way forward was for William to face the reality of what had happened and begin to make sense of it in his own way. It was clear to Kate that William had always believed in the monarchy and its role in preserving tradition and stability. But now, with the full extent of the royal family's complicity in Diana's suffering exposed, William was faced with an unthinkable question. Could he continue to uphold the values of the monarchy when its very foundation was built on secrecy, deception, and control? The idea of inheriting a throne built on such a legacy was becoming increasingly untenable for him. For Kate, the path was no less complicated. She had always been a part of the royal family in a supportive capacity, focused on her duties as a wife and mother, and upholding the public image of the monarchy. But now she found herself at the center of a storm that she could no longer remain neutral in. The public had already started to look to her as a symbol of change, and her every move was being scrutinized. While she was deeply committed to supporting William, she was also aware that her role in the family had changed irrevocably. She was no longer just a wife or a mother. She was now a key figure in a larger movement that sought to bring transparency and accountability to the monarchy. Kate understood that the monarchy's survival hinged on its ability to adapt to the changing expectations of the public. For decades, the royal family had maintained an image of invulnerability, carefully crafting a narrative that portrayed them as above reproach. But the leaks, the documents, and the exposure of the truth had shattered that illusion. The monarchy could no longer hide behind the facade of tradition. It had to evolve, and it had to do so quickly. The question was no longer whether the monarchy would change, but how it would change, and what role Kate, William, and others would play in that transformation. As the royal family navigated these turbulent waters, there was a growing sense of urgency. The monarchy had been brought to the brink, and now it was up to William and Kate to decide whether they would remain part of an institution that had failed so many of its own members, or if they would seek to transform it from within. There were no easy answers, and each choice seemed fraught with peril. In private conversations, William expressed his concerns to Kate. He talked about the pressure he felt to live up to the legacy of his family, to fulfill his duties as the future king, and to restore the monarchy to its former standing. But he also confided in her the doubts he was wrestling with. How could he lead a family that had betrayed his mother, that had silenced her pain for the sake of preserving the monarchy's image? How could he wear the crown when it had been built on lies? Kate listened, offering her support, but also encouraging William to follow his heart. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also believed that William had the strength to lead the monarchy into a new era. The truth had come out, and there was no going back. Now the task was to figure out how they would rebuild, how they would redefine what it meant to be part of the royal family in the wake of such revelations. As William and Kate navigated their personal struggles, the world outside the palace walls was changing. The public's demands for transparency grew louder, and the royal family's every move was being watched. In the face of such scrutiny, the palace was forced to acknowledge the need for reform. But reform would not come easily. The very institutions that had upheld the monarchy for centuries now seemed archaic, and it was clear that they could not withstand the growing tide of public demand for accountability. In the midst of this turmoil, there were moments of reflection for both Kate and William. They reflected on the legacy of Diana and how her voice had been silenced for so long. Diana had been a symbol of grace, compassion, and vulnerability, but she had also been a woman who had suffered immensely at the hands of the institution she had married into. The revelation that the royal family had known about her pain and had done little to help her was a profound betrayal, and it was one that neither Kate nor William could ignore. Diana's legacy was now intertwined with their own, and Kate understood that the monarchy's future depended on how they responded to that legacy. Could they honor Diana's memory by confronting the truth and embracing a new path forward? Or would they continue to uphold an institution that had chosen image over truth, silence over justice? In the weeks and months that followed, Kate and William worked together, alongside advisors and experts, to come up with a plan for how to move the monarchy forward. They knew that the road would be long and filled with challenges, but they also understood that the monarchy had a choice. It could continue to cling to the past, to the traditions that had defined it for centuries, or it could evolve, learning from its mistakes and embracing a new vision for the future. The decision was in their hands, and the world was watching. Kate was determined that the truth would not be buried again. Diana's voice, silenced for so long, would be heard, and the monarchy would be held accountable for its actions. This was not just a fight for Diana's legacy. It was a fight for the future of the royal family itself. And for Kate, there was no turning back. The truth had come out, and it was time for the monarchy to face it head-on. William, for his part, felt the weight of his mother's legacy and his own future as the heir to the throne bearing down on him. The royal family had always been an institution defined by its secrecy, and the revelations about Diana's pain had exposed a deep, dark undercurrent of dishonesty and betrayal that ran through its foundations. How could he lead an institution built on such lies? How could he, as its future king, reconcile his duty with his sense of justice. The emotional toll on both William and Kate was profound. The path forward would not be easy, and there were no guarantees. Yet, in the midst of their struggle, they were united in one purpose: to bring the truth into the light, to stand by Diana's memory, and to reshape the monarchy into something that would not be defined by secrets, betrayal, and silence. It was a monumental task, one that would challenge not only the royal family, but also the very ideals of duty, tradition, and legacy that had long been held sacred. The monarchy was at a crossroads, and it was clear that William and Kate's decisions in the coming months would determine whether it could adapt to a new era, or whether it would crumble under the weight of its own past. For Kate, the task ahead was one of both personal and public significance. She had been thrust into the role of a leader, not just as a wife or mother, but as a key figure in a movement to redefine what it meant to be a part of the royal family in the modern age. The world was watching, and the stakes were higher than ever. Yet, in the midst of the chaos and the pressure, Kate remained steadfast in her commitment to the truth. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the monarchy would never be the same again. And for Kate, this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one in which she would help shape the future of the royal family, not by preserving its past, but by facing the truth and embracing a more transparent, accountable future.